Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie in his 40s discovers his wife's infidelity with their son's friend, Jack. Devastated, he confronts them and asks his wife to leave. Facing the consequences, she pleads for forgiveness but ultimately departs. Their son witnesses the betrayal, causing irreparable damage to their relationship. Despite his wife's pleas, he stands firm, and Jack faces consequences for his actions. Now let's get into the story. Time of this tragic tale, I was 41 and my wife was 36. We had a teenage son who had lots of friends that we welcomed into our home. Even though our house got loud, it was full of love and acceptance for our boy and our boy's friends. One of them, named Jack, didn't have a great family life, so he spent extra time at our house. Sometimes we called him our second son, which makes this story all the more disturbing. My wife's hobby was writing erotica and romance stories online. She was good at it, and she had a really creative mind. Some of her writing even took a sci-fi turn, to appease the nerds, male and female, in the audience. Sometimes her skill and creativity intimidated me because I had trouble accepting myself and displaying confidence. I mostly felt stupid whenever I tried to roleplay or call her by some nickname. One day, I came home to find Jack sitting on our couch with his arm around my wife. They were watching a television show on Netflix alone. I cleared my throat when I walked in, and they both jumped up. Jack looked embarrassed. My wife just smiled awkwardly and greeted me. I asked where our son was, and she said he'd just left for the store to get a movie night snack. I asked why he went alone and looked at Jack. He stammered something I couldn't hear and went out the front door. My wife just shrugged and went to the kitchen to get a drink. I made a mental note to keep an eye on the two of them. I came home a little earlier than usual from work one day and found that the front door was bolt locked. It normally never was because it doesn't line up quite right, so it's hard to unlock. I worried that someone was trying to keep me out. When I finally got it open, my wife was just standing naked in the hallway in a tempting pose. She was smiling mischievously. After we did it, our son barged in the front door. I had to lay low on top of my wife to hide and told him to head up to his room for a few minutes. He said okay, but asked where Jack was. My wife replied that he wasn't there, but at the same time, Jack came out of the downstairs bathroom. He awkwardly rushed upstairs with our son. I looked at my wife, perplexed. I asked why she said he wasn't here if he was in the bathroom and why she was there and looked ready to sleep with him. She was stumped and tried to tell me, unconvincingly, that she didn't know he was in there. I asked how that was possible, and she didn't know what to say, so she said I was being silly and he probably slept over without us knowing. I let it go for a while. I wanted to trust my wife, and we've been together for 18 years at this point. Jack continued sleeping over pretty often, but I paid more attention to when he did so I could keep track of who was in the house. I also installed security cameras. I only got two, one I planned to put on the back door and one in the hallway inside. My wife convinced me that our Ring doorbell didn't offer enough security because of the angle it was pointing. So, I put one camera on the front porch and one in the hallway. Our backyard was fenced in, so I wasn't as worried about that one. I could see anyone coming into the house from the hallway camera. While I was at work one day, the hallway camera notified me several times. I considered muting the notifications because I knew my wife was up and about in the house, doing her housewife tasks. Something told me to check it, and there was a major clue. First, I saw Jack going out the back door. This was odd because there was nothing to do back there, and if he was heading to his car, it would have been quicker to go out the front door. Then, sure enough, 5 minutes later, my wife went out the back door. My heart was pounding. I knew they were up to something they shouldn't be. I thought of how the front door was bolted the other day, how I kept finding them alone, and how sheepish Jack looked every time. 10 minutes later, they didn't even bother to hide the fact that they came in together. Jack just held open the door, as if they both just happened to come in at the same time. They both had dirty knees. I went home immediately and showed her the video on my phone. I wasn't speaking kindly when I asked her what her explanation was. It felt like my world was ending. This was my son's friend. Not only would we divorce, but my son and Jack would never be the same. I told her that Jack looked to us for guidance, like parental figures. My wife started tearing up, but she said it was because she hated that I didn't believe her. She said she was telling the truth and had no reason to lie to me. Just then, our son stepped in from behind us. He told me he saw his mom and Jack having intimate in the backyard. I freaked out. This moment was very traumatic. When it sunk in that her son just witnessed her infidelity with his best friend, my wife started wailing. Not only had he witnessed it, he just told me the truth. She got on her knees and clamped her hands together, pleading with me not to leave her. I felt completely numb, physically and mentally. I didn't know what to do with myself. Breathing was even a burden. I told her to leave, that I needed time to process what happened. I felt weak, like I might have forgiven her if I didn't tell her to leave. My son supported me, which made me upset and relieved at the same time. I was there when she had to call her parents to explain what was happening. She just lost it when they told her she wasn't welcome at their home. They were so disappointed in her that they didn't want to help her evade the consequences for this terrible, embarrassing choice she made. She screamed and threw her phone against the wall. I let her sit on the floor and cry for a while before I nudged her with my foot and told her to get going. She was like a defeated zombie. She asked me where she was supposed to go, but I just told her it wasn't up to me. I knew she could go to one of her friends' houses as a last resort. She was just embarrassed she messed up this bad. She didn't want me to divorce her, so she tried to make it seem like she had nowhere else to go. Eventually, she did leave without her son. All this time, Jack was out and didn't know I saw the footage of them coming back inside. When he returned, my son asked me to talk to him because he couldn't even look at him. I totally understood. So as hard as it was, I confronted Jack. I told him he and my son weren't going to be friends for a while because we both knew what he was doing with my wife. He was terrified, as any young man would be. He apologized to me, turned heel, and ran. I yelled after him, telling him not to sleep with anyone's wife ever again. I think he learned his lesson. I didn't care to know if my wife learned her lesson as long as she faced the consequences of her actions, and I know she has in this case. Our son hardly has a relationship with her now. He doesn't trust her and certainly doesn't want to date a woman like her. Today's second story. In this story, Opie discovers his wife's affair with her gym trainer, who she claimed was a woman. Confronting both, he gathers evidence and divorces her, gaining primary custody of their children and support from his best friend. Despite his ex-wife's pleas, he remains resolute, troubled by her refusal to admit the extent of the affair. The divorce strains her relationship with her parents. Now let's get into the story. I, 46 male, was married to my wife, 48, female, for 16 years. We first met on a boat during a party hosted by her parents. Even though they really wanted grandkids, they did not like me. So our relationship was basically supported by them ignoring us. I honestly felt like she was everything I could have wanted in a lifelong partner. We got married and had 3 kids together. Understand standability. My wife gained some weight. By the time our youngest was 6 years old, my wife was 275 pounds. After having 3 kids and being married 16 years, it's not hard to believe my wife joined a gym full of determination one New Year's Day to get her old body back. Over the course of nearly 2 years, she worked with one trainer in particular. I knew she was working one-on-one with a trainer, but she told me it was a woman. My wife got down to 150 pounds. She looked amazing and her confidence was soaring. Her parents watched our kids whenever she asked, but surprisingly, after her weight loss, we only went on a few dates. Since it had been a while since we went out and she was down to 150, I thought it would be nice to celebrate. My reasoning was that my wife didn't want to bother her parents too much for dates, but I knew how much they loved our kids. So even though they didn't like me very much and my wife usually did all the communicating with them, I decided to call and ask them to watch the kids for us that very night. My mill was confused and told me that they already babysat the children several times this month. I asked when, and she hardly had to recap with me because she assumed I already knew about this. It came to light that my wife was dropping the kids off at their house whenever she went out with them and during times when we both should have been at work. I thought of specific times over the past several months when she told me they were going to the park, shopping, or just, and I trusted her. Now that I knew she was lying, I confronted her as soon as she came in the door. She became flustered and said her mother must have been mistaken because she never lied to me. I tried to get any bit of truth out of her, but it only made her mad until she left the house alone. I did some sleuthing and found one of my wife's closest friends, Melissa, on the internet. She replied to my message of concern, admitting that my wife told her about another man. The trainer that my wife claimed was a woman was not. She told Melissa that about 3 months after she met her trainer, he started complimenting her and said he enjoyed their time together. That's when he got her attention and they started their emotional affair. Melissa was sworn to secrecy, but not for my sake, for my in-laws and my wife's sake, whose lives would become much worse if they didn't get to see the children whenever they wanted. I was devastated. I asked if this affair became physical, but Melissa didn't know that. I called my best friend of 20 years since my parents died and I was an only child. I needed his help. He never had children and had been 3 years since I spoke to him. He was successful and trustworthy and agreed to watch my kids for me to help me through this mess. I went to the gym and found AP. I started yelling at him, accusing him of starting a relationship with my wife. He seemed extremely guilty and worried that I was causing a scene. He didn't know what to say to make this better because there wasn't anything that could have helped. I started screaming in frustration with the past 16 years of my life and my children's faces flashing before my eyes. The gym owner quickly rushed over. Within a minute, at least 30 people watched, eyes bugging out of their heads as this stranger tried to calm me down. We got into the security room with all the cameras, where I calmed down and explained the drama that concerned his employee together. We looked through camera footage of her visits with AP. It didn't take long at all to find footage of him touching and rubbing her when he assumed they were out of camera view. I hated seeing it. I hated that my wife didn't smack him across the face. The gym owner stepped out of the room to fire AP immediately, and then he begged me to leave his business out of this completely. He gave me a hard copy of the incriminating video clips, and I drove back to my friend's house in a daze. We hung out with the kids together until they went to bed. I talked his ear off, and he helped me to find hope in the future. Just before, my wife called crying. She already knew AP was fired, and I knew everything, so she begged me to forgive her. I told her to move in with AP. She said she couldn't, but wouldn't tell me why. She didn't say she wouldn't. She said she couldn't because AP told her they were done. He was too worried about having to start his career over again and whatever bad reputation I could stick on him for touching my wife in the gym. She freaked out after I told her she couldn't move back in with me or her parents. I hung up on her and called to tell them everything. They didn't want to believe it, but they didn't want to see my video evidence either. They told me they would make their own decision after our divorce was final. Well, after the hearings, it was ordered that I take primary custody of our children, the house, a little alimony, and child support payment from my ex-wife. Her parents were beside themselves. They couldn't look her in the eye, and I know for a fact that they no longer speak to her. I still let them have visits with the children, but it isn't often. Right before the divorce was final, my ex tried begging for our life back. She said without me and our 3 kids, everything in life is pointless. I still divorced her after 16 years. The hardest part was that she never admitted to having intimate with him. She just wanted me to believe it was occasional inappropriate touching and maybe a few flirtatious texts. So I guess she expects me to believe that all the time she had her parents watch the kids over the past 2 years, she never slept with AP. I'm not stupid.